So I'm Ryan Roberts. I'm a clinical mental health counselor. And so a lot of what I do is direct one-on-one mental health counseling, and my specialty is in ADHD. I do a lot of executive functioning work. It's a lot of what I did for many years. I've done this type of work for like 15 years, where I worked primarily with students in residential treatment centers, helping them transition from residential treatment to beyond that into, I would say, real life. It's kind of all real life experience, but when they transition from there to particularly college, it's really, really tough. And so I've taken that and now do that more in a clinical capacity, and I also do that with kids that aren't in residential treatment. Typically a little bit easier, but that does mean working a lot with families, which is what a lot of you will be doing today as well. You learn skills for yourself that you'll have to manage for you, spouses, other family members, to help your kids too, and maybe other professionals you can bring into your network. All right, so that's my background. So when you ask questions about what we can do for some of our kids and how to help with academics, it'll be coming from more that mental health side. I do have here with me today my lovely assistant, Lindsay Roberts. She's a health and wellness director at our same company. Her background's in nutrition, and her specialty is helping on the biological side of helping with ADHD. She's not presenting today, but there might be some questions I cannot answer. May defer to her as well. But while I might help with the mental health side, our company does focus on a more holistic approach. So mental health, sometimes a physical health or medication route. There's going to be the academic accommodation side that we might touch on today, the social side, and so on. So ask questions if I can't get to it today, or if it's not relevant for the workshop, I might ask that you come talk to me afterward, but do ask these questions anyway. So important things to know right off the bat is with ADHD, there are some new ways we talk about ADHD, and that's ADD is no longer a term we really use. It still comes up a lot, but we don't really separate them out as diagnoses anymore. ADD and ADHD, we now know come from the same cause. It's a neurogenetic disease, comes from the same singular cause, which means we now just say ADHD for both. But they are two different symptom clusters. So you might have ADHD, but you might show the inattentive type, which is what we think of as ADD, right? That's the ADHD diagnosis. And you might have the hyperactive type, ADHD, still the ADHD diagnosis. So if you hear ADHD, you've heard ADD thrown around, recognize they're the same thing still. And there still might be clinicians that kind of use the old verbiage, same thing, okay? There are other terms that you might see now, not official terms in terms of like what we use with insurances or clinical routes, but these pop up. They can sound more gentle, they can sound more specific. I think all that's fine, but the one I think is most relevant is motivation deficit disorder. With ADHD, a lot of the time, the issue is related to dopamine, which serves a few main purposes. One is motor activity. So too much or too little affects how our muscles move or fail to move. Another is our ability to regulate emotions. So the ability to feel distress and actually work through it. Like some of you had already described to me before we started the workshop, man, my kid struggles with tantrums. Dopamine can help us think through, regulate, and actually take an action we want to intentionally through these issues rather than tantrum. Dopamine helps with that, but it also helps with motivation, initiation, and reward, which a lot of you are already familiar with. Dopamine, it's called a tonic level. You have a lower level in some parts of your brain and a higher level in other parts. When this happens, we struggle with motivation. We also might be really prone to certain emotions. It's called emotional lability. We spike really quickly too. A lot of us that might have ADHD, me too by the way, we get angry really quickly, we get excited really quickly. Who here has ADHD? It's really easy to get excited, huh? We hear something exciting and we get pumped. We get excited, okay? So while there's a deficit with motivation, there's some things we get motivated with very quickly, so long as it's dopamine related. Here's what it looks like in the brain. Typically, there are two major parts of the brain, the front and back. The back is used for knowing things. This is where a lot of sensory information is. We do store a lot of memories here. There's a lot of survival parts of the brain here, but this is where we get some level of how do we operate in our lives here. On the front part, this is where we make decisions about what we do. I'll use the term performance. What happens is in between these two parts, there are these little guardsmen. For most of us meaning your typical brains, these guards do a great job. Their job is to take urges from the backside of the brain that go to the front. These urges from the knowing part that say, I'm thirsty, I have to use the restroom, I have to tantrum, I have to roll on the ground to get what I want, I have to do it now. It takes those urges and shuts them down unless they become urgent. I have to do it now. I'm super thirsty, I have to do something about it. I have to punch this guy, I'm threatened. If it's not that urgent, it doesn't quite let the front part of your brain know yet. You're not so sleepy yet. If you're not so sleepy yet, it doesn't tell that front part of your brain. Socializing is a huge source of motivation for a lot of people with ADHD. And people with ADHD love connecting from other people. Sometimes even if it's negative, you can kind of trick your brain to going, oh, got a hit of dopamine. So these activities are all very good and usually more powerful than like internal sources of motivation. Because with dopamine, there's an element of dealing with screens that can seem really rewarding, but it can drain a lot of dopamine too. We do a lot of, you get some reward back, but man, it can consume a lot. After about 30 minutes, we can consume a lot of that dopamine, especially if you do it early in the morning. Those of you that have kids that are using screens early in the morning versus using the screens later in the day, you probably see a difference. There's a reason for that. But it can be tough. If you use it for less than 30 minutes, you can do a pretty good job with it, but it's really, really hard to get people to stop using screens within 30 minutes. We'll talk about how to work with that, and that is an intervention we can use. But it is tough. And for people with ADHD, it's much more sticky and harder to break away from. Good. One of the things that can occur with distractibility, these urges that pop up, is this element of, man, I have to look and go to these things. That's where these urges on the backside of your brain, that's what they do. When those guards are not doing their job, something like your screen or notification going off on your phone, those with ADHD have a way harder time ignoring those urges. So even though you want to, even if you want to, even if something else is urgent, like homework, we really feel like we struggle to turn away from turn away from the screen to do homework. And a lot of that's involuntary. This even happens when we are asleep. When you're asleep, your brain actually hears everything that goes on and has to decide whether or not to wake you up for it. With ADHD, it's much more prone to waking you up and saying, this is a problem. This is an alert. Whereas most other brains go, no, you can sleep through this. That's the issue with these guards that don't do their job. This can be remedied a little bit, actually quite a bit, with something like stimulants. That's why some people on stimulants actually can focus better because that part of the brain is waking up. So you'd expect people to be bouncing off the walls with ADHD and stimulants, but instead, I know some of you are already like, yeah, I recognize that. You've had that experience, it seems like, because that part of your brain is actually shutting down a lot of the urges that normally go through the inhibitors, but instead they're not. That's what's happening, and that's how ADHD works. And you can use a med approach. Very appropriate, I think. But if you're not using a med approach, you can do this behaviorally, but it takes some practice and some training. And with your kids, you'll be doing this, helping them learn which distractions do we give into and which ones do we not. That's going to be a big thing, but you have to help them understand this, and you have to understand this yourself. One thing to keep in mind, especially for the older kids that you have here, are a lot of the time they know the thing that they want to do, and they know how to do it some of the time, but don't have the motivation. Sometimes they know what it is they want to do, but then they don't know how to do it. This is pretty common. Something like writing a paper. I know there's a paper I need to write. How do I organize this? The first example I gave is like, well, I know how to write a paper, I know how to organize, I can teach someone else, but I'm just not motivated, I'd rather do something else. These are the both common routes. Here, I want to focus on the not knowing what to do piece. A lot of the time, helping your kids figure out, I know the task at hand, what do I do about it? This is a main point of frustration, especially if your kids are starting to get towards the end of high school and into college. And even if you are struggling with ADHD, you probably have experienced this. Like I have this huge laundry list of items I have to complete. And it's like I've had days where I've done all of this before. I see some of you smiling. Yeah, you've experienced this. I've experienced this. Where you're like, man, I've done this before. Why can't I do it again? It's frustrating. There's a reason for it. Knowing how to work through that and recognizing you're fighting against neurology will go a long way. And then I want you to keep that mindset as you're going through these exercises. A lot of you have been given paper, pencils to take notes. You can use your phone as well, but I want you to keep this in mind. I'm a huge fan of magic tricks. And one of my favorite magicians, I read his book, is Gene Hugard. I believe he's an Australian magician. And what he wrote in this book was a story that he got from a fan of his who approached him after a show and said, yo, Gene, his exact words, I mastered 150 tricks because of you. How many do you know? And Gene thought and he counted and he said, I think I know about 6, maybe 7 at this point. I went through the book, I'm like, there's more than 7 in this book. There's no way he knows just 7. And so I kept going through the book and wondering why he talked about this. And he does cover it later in the book. But the main point I think he was trying to make, he did eventually make, was to be a good magician and to come across as a good magician. You don't have to know every trick in the world. You just have to know enough to put on a show. And he would do 6 tricks in a show and go on tour and do the same 6 tricks and sell those tickets and go again and keep repeating. He did enough to have an impact, provide the audience what they needed, and give them a good night. For all of you, to get the impact that your kids need, to see some growth and progress, reduce that frustration and feel good about what they're doing, you only need to learn 1 or 2 tricks. Which is actually what I did when I started studying magic. I did 2 magic tricks for 3 months. I would do one. People are like, whoa, Ryan, do another trick. And I would do another one. They're like, wow, he's a real magician. And that was all I knew for months. But it fooled everybody for a long time. It worked well. And that's what all of you can do also. Do 2 magic tricks. Do something, implement it. Stay consistent. Really implement it. Stick with it. You're going to learn a lot more than 2. But hone in on some, okay? So you write down a couple of your favorites, but don't get hung up on doing all of them, okay? We will learn about a couple of stages I think would be helpful to think about when training our kids, training ourselves to work with ADHD. When it comes to tasking, the first one is the initiation phase. Initiation is a huge pain point for a lot of people with ADHD. It's very painful, there's a lot of deliberation, and sometimes this can happen all day long. And even just by thinking about the task we want to do, it can sap our motivation. It's very, very painful. So, trying to get the foot in the door, trying to get them started, and not really worrying about even if they get more done than that. That's good enough, it really is. There'll be more later, but if they get started and then they back out, give them a high five. We'll talk about why. That's a very useful skill. With deliberation, I mentioned that it can reduce motivation. There are certain techniques for this, but one issue that can happen is, I mentioned that dopamine is used to help regulate distress. When we sit there and we're thinking about, man, I've got to do this task. I don't want to, but I've got to do it. And you sit there and you're trying to amass willpower to get something done. Oh, it's exhausting because we're fighting against, well, I don't want to go to this video game, but I also don't want to go do this paper. And we're in this in-between limbo state of trying to make something happen. Our brain is trying to regulate that distress. Sometimes we do give in and do something and cope. And sometimes we do get the task done, but in this middle stage, we're regulating, doing a decent job of it, but that consumes that dopamine, one of the purposes of dopamine I mentioned earlier. The longer we do that, the less resources we have to actually function and the less rewarding that task is at the end. That's not what we want. Though it is nice that you got it done, but if that is a major hurdle, if your kid deliberates all day long and maybe get something done at the very end, work on either getting started and then backing out, work on only doing something at the end, being okay all day long. That's a rough habit to break, but reduce that deliberation. Maybe saying you can jump in 5 seconds, and if you don't do it in that time, reassess in 30 minutes. Also cool techniques that we'll go over. But there are lots of ways you can manage this. But reducing deliberation is very, very helpful. With motivation, there are 2 ways that we can manage it. We can increase our willpower. We can decrease resistance. Willpower, us, discipline, free will, utilizing some method of actually using agency to choose what we want to do. That's great. There are ways we can do this. Some of you have already asked about what can we do to increase dopamine, what can we do to actually make it easier to task. This is one element of that, jumpstart skills. That's what you will learn today. What jumpstart skills are there that we can use? The other one, reducing resistance, is re-engineering the environment. We actually think less about how do we use agency to get stuff done, and we think more of how do we make it easier for our kid to get stuff done without asking them, which sounds like a pipe dream, but it's doable, and it's very fun. When you can get to that point where they are doing stuff more naturally without you begging them or bribing them, it's pretty cool. I'll tell you about how we can do that. But those are the 2 main skills that we will utilize. Jumpstart skills. There are some ways that we can manage this. In a clinical setting, sometimes we can really dive in, and it's really fun to dive in and say, what is it at the point where you have to perform, you have to go and do something that gets in the way? Is it anxiety? Is it shame? Is it just this temptation of being with friends? It's fun to troubleshoot that. But really, in the end, as a parent, while we can do that and it can be fun, just finding anything that motivates them. And it's totally okay that it's external. Finding a healthy boundary, finding a healthy priority, you can give them $1 every time that they start a task, up to $3 a day. It doesn't really matter what you do. But finding something external, doesn't have to be intrinsic, is a fine way to start. We'll go over other techniques, but if you can get them to get pumped and excited, you're building some level of intrinsic motivation, you're building some level of extrinsic motivation, that's good enough. They're making decisions, good. With jumpstart skills, you can do things unrelated to the task, like exercise, like take a nap. These things also help you task. When you're ready to regulate, when you're ready to work through distress, it's also helpful. When you do go choose to work, when you do go choose to enact some skills, it's much easier to do so. Engineering the environment. This is the reducing resistance route. I'll tell you a story first. So I was brought onto a team at a treatment center, this was a while ago, where their academic situation was in shambles. None of the kids were doing their full academic plan. There were a couple of kids doing like half of their plan, which was good, considering the circumstance and all the resistance. But no one was doing their full plan out of like 130 kids. So I was brought into one home of like 13 boys, and I was kind of given free rein to help that home get a new structure to help get academics going. I didn't implement like an exercise routine. I didn't implement, hey, let's get the therapist on board, let's get parents to discipline them, let's do whatever. I did this route. I said, all right, we'll do a few things. First, there's a study hall time. And staff were like, okay, yes. How do we make them do homework? I'm like, we don't. We have study hall time. They can't do video games, but they can do whatever else they want. And the staff were like, I don't quite see how this helps yet. I'm like, you will. Then I did the next thing. I'm like, all right, staff, you're allowed to do your homework. Normally, staff weren't allowed to do homework on the job. I'm like, you can, but only during study hall time. Then I let staff order pizza during that time. And I did another thing where activities couldn't be scheduled during that time. Then I found the ringleader of these little boys. And I asked him for help on my Sudoku puzzle because he was really good at puzzles. And I wanted it to look like homework. So I brought him over and I asked for help. And I told him I'd give him some pizza if he would help me with it. So he was there. I told him not to tell anyone, knowing that he would tell everyone that he got pizza. And what I wanted to accomplish was that it looked like he was kind of in a studying situation. He didn't have a video game. He wasn't really playing games, but he was kind of working on something that looked like book and paper type of environment or type of activity. And from then, other people wanted pizza, weren't allowed to have it. But he kept offering to help with like puzzles. We found situations that looked like there's a study environment. Some people were actually studying. Some people were doing things that looked like studying. We did more and more and more things like this. Eventually, it took a couple of weeks, it took like 6 weeks. It was a grind, it took some time. But after about 6 weeks, the first boy came up and he's like, Ryan, I need help with homework. I was like, I'd love to help, but I can't. Not until tomorrow at study hall. We already missed study hall today. He's like, I need help today. I'm like, okay, I'll help you, but in exchange, you have to also study tomorrow. He's like, fine, deal. And this kind of snowballed everything from there. He was allowed to come to study hall the next day. I gave him some pizza. And what happened was a series of things where people start to see, without us actually asking them to do homework, up until that point where the kid offered, I want to do homework with you, Ryan. An environment where people are more naturally and more likely to do things. Boy after boy after boy were willing to do more because it's easier. They were less likely to do the other activities that were more boring than hanging out with all the other cool people that were doing homework, all the cool staff, all the other cool kids, all the yummy food. It was much easier. All of you can do this too. It can take some time to be consistent, but it's actually really addicting to get to the point where you can set up an environment where you're like, man, my kid is doing anything I want them to without me asking. You have to be very creative. You might have to implement a lot of things, but it's a way to make it work. You can do it for yourselves too, by the way. Things I do with clients might be when you open up your computer, just set up some tabs that automatically open to the homework tabs that you want, and don't let your video game apps be on your home screen, which is often what they'll do. Making them very hard to access. Add 2 points of resistance, 2 extra clicks, or whatever it may be. Whatever you can do to add resistance or reduce resistance is enough. Okay. Let's go over some specific ideas. So I gave you a rough overview and some examples, but here's what I might recommend. For jumpstart skills, especially for kids, exercise is huge, and it might actually give them more energy, truthfully. Sometimes they get more energized for a period. Some of you are nodding, like, yeah, this can happen. But it's much easier for them to feel rewarded when they're doing something that causes distress or boredom. With my clients, sometimes I just put on like a Just Dance video. I love it. You can be terrible, they love it too. The building rapport thing, this sounds simple. Really, you don't have to do anything special though. When you sit there and connect with them, you don't have to necessarily ask about their day. You can sit in silence. You don't have to ask them anything. Sit there, chill, watch them play a game for like 10 minutes, not saying a word. You actually still cause a bonding reaction. Don't feel like you have to do anything special. And this can be great if you've caused a type of rupture. Like, man, I've caused like a problem in our relationship. If you just sit, say nothing, it can still cause some reparative efforts. When we're talking about building rapport, we don't have to do anything particular, nothing special, okay? Meditation can feel like torture. But I did want to mention this because boredom is hard for people with ADHD. But this is actually one of the most efficacious interventions when it comes to improving someone's willpower, their ability to utilize their choices to make decisions around homework. Being bored for like 10 minutes helps a ton. It's very hard to get them to do it though. So, you can go for 90 seconds, great. It's not quite enough for what we're looking for. It's great to build a habit. It kind of helps, but if we can get to like 5 minutes, that's a win. It's huge. But start with 90 seconds and we start to get there. Okay, on the other side, I give you an example with what I did at that treatment center, but here's what you can do at home. With I guess there's the group environment that I mentioned. There's a lot of people you can get at the same time doing the same thing, at least that looks like the same thing. Man, you could honestly be doing like a Sudoku puzzle like I mentioned, and it's very fun to still just be doing something that seems fun, and your kid could just come and just want to be with you. It's great. Still encourage homework if you can, but you don't actually have to ask them to do anything. Reward them if they do something else, but don't ask them. Try not to ask them to do anything if you're doing this route. Set up the environment, nothing else. Screens though, this one's weird because we think if a screen is on and something's playing, not good, but if it's off, good. Even if the screen is off, their brains want to look at it. And if the phone is off or the screen's off, but it's face up on the table, their brains want to look at it. Simply turning that phone upside down or putting a blanket over the TV helps that brain that has that urge to look, helps that urge go down. They may not even be tempted, but their brain wants to be distracted. So the environmental piece there is reducing the urges. Making it so that there's a time of place or time of day, or a place or time of day that works is helpful, like bringing treats out. Like a bowl of popcorn, really cheap, sit it out there. It's only there, only available at a certain time. Is great, and don't even telling the kid, hey, this is here when there's homework time going on. Putting it out and removing it at the same time you stay, creating a pattern, is great. And it's a good exercise for all of you to be thinking about what is it that gets my kid to like anticipate patterns. It's a great exercise for all of you too. I love the question, how long-term are these? So many of these are not meant to be long-term. The exception are if you can form habits and routines around like setting up your environment so you don't have to use willpower. Like I boot up my computer and all of my work stuff pulls up automatically. Awesome. You don't have to do much with it, which is great. But the jumpstart skills, use them as needed. So you can use them as often as you want, but they typically last anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes. So you can build some of that motivation, but it gets consumed quickly too. And I see this with my clients as well, where they get excited about an activity, but they're like, man, the day I didn't use it, nothing got done. And the day I used it, it only worked for the next hour. And it's like, but I had to spend 4 hours on homework, and I couldn't maintain the motivation. The point for that first set of skills of getting your foot in the door is really helping them be content with just getting started. They don't have to make it all the way through finishing a task, which is actually this next section. So recognize there's going to be a difference between helping them be okay getting started, but not necessarily be okay with or feel bad about not finishing everything. There is going to be a difference. So just be okay getting started. And sometimes I tell my clients, even my adult clients, get started, spend 30 seconds on it, bail. You're free to bail, you're done for the night. It's tough. So with the exception of the engineering and the environment, a lot of them short term. We didn't talk about perseveration yet. Is that a new word for a lot of people? It is for most people, so let's talk about that. Perseveration. A good thing to know about ADHD is that at this stage, when we get them comfortable with starting, we want them to stay stuck on an assignment, stuck on a task. And typically, people with ADHD, like their brains get stuck on these tasks, and it's different than hyperfocus, which is what we used to think is associated with ADHD, but it's not. At least not as we used to think of it. So hyperfocus, I'll just say HF, is more associated with autism spectrum disorder. They can occur together, which cause some weird things. We won't talk about that today. And perseveration, this is ADHD. This is the stickiness. Someone with hyperfocus might be in a house, might have a kid, say their name is Ryan, and they want to play video games until the house burns down. And what would happen is they don't even sense that the house is on fire, they don't smell the smoke. They don't feel the heat. People would be saying, Ryan, get out of the house. And I wouldn't even know what's going on if I had a hyperfocus issue. I'd be dialed in. Perseveration. Same thing. But while the house would still burn down on me, you have someone in there, they're stuck. I, or other people with ADHD, would know that there's heat. We feel it. In fact, we're very sensitive to it. Remember those urges? We feel it. We smell the smoke. We hear all the sounds. But we have to finish the boss or get to the next save point. Those of you that have kids that play video games, you've heard that a bazillion times. That's perseveration. They look the same because both times the kid stays in there till the house burns down. That's why we got them mixed up a lot. And so treatment for hyperfocus didn't really work with ADHD, and we didn't quite understand why. It kind of did when they also had autism, but now we know. With perseveration, people can get stuck. This can be good if you're like, man, I gotta work on this math assignment, I have 2 problems left, I gotta finish it, I can't leave yet, or I'm doing dishes, I have 2 dishes left, I can't be done until I have to finish these last 2. Good, bad, that's fine. The issue is when there are situations like I have to get my homework started and I'm just scrolling. I can't break away from my phone. So transitioning from one task to another is very hard. So you can see a little bit as to why just starting on a task is huge, because we can break a little bit of that perseveration cycle. Once we get them started, we have some more long-term interventions we want to utilize. These long ones are keeping them on that task until they can go longer and longer and longer until they can finish that task. Sometimes they can go like 90-minute cycles and be okay, but there are a good chunk of people that, with some practice, can end up going 3 or 4 hours without a break. It takes a bit of practice to get to that point. You have to be quite content with a lot of distress and a lot of boredom, but it takes a lot of practice. You can get there. So that is what it looks like when it comes to perseveration. So you're asking, what do we do when there's a perseveration issue and a hyperfocus issue? So it's easy to identify when there's one versus the other, because sometimes they get stuck and they bounce around, right? That is when they are identifying that there are certain stimuli going on. That's in the more the ADHD side, right? It's tough when they are ignoring you, though. Like, do they actually hear me, or are they just hyper-focused and dialed in? That could be a little tough. I have to work with that sometimes. But if you can identify which parts of their brain they're kind of dialed into, are they actually hyper-focused, or are they ignoring, or are they stuck? That can help you know what interventions to use. There are different interventions for different diagnoses. If you feel like you're dealing with both at the same time, like, man, they're dialed in, but also should I try and like get their attention? Like I touch them, they're like, oh, hey mom. And then I try and pull them away. What do? Typically working more on the distress management with perseveration. Okay, I've got their attention now. Hyperfocus, we can get their attention at some level, but once we do, perseveration causes distress. I'll give you an example. I have a client that I worked with like a year ago, but he struggled with when he was like doing dishes, and I asked him, hey, to test it out, do all dishes except for 1 spoon. And he did that, and he'd leave 1 spoon, and he couldn't quite do it. He really struggled. But that's where the distress comes in. If your kid struggles with leaving something undone, then you might want to work on some of that distress with them. Hey, can we transition tasks? Can we do it more often? That would be very helpful. The hyper-focus side, you can work on the autism side, do some practice, okay? But the distress is more of what I'm concerned about when it comes like task initiation and distress management, so that's what I work on. Okay, good. Okay, some new, I guess a little bit of review, but some new things about motivation to be aware of. When we have to come back to the task over and over, so we're on a task and we get distracted and come back. we get distracted and come back. And this happens again and again. It does consume some motivation. That's okay. All of us that do a task, we consume motivation most of the time if it's not rewarding. If it's not rewarding till the end, at least. With ADHD, this is especially the case. Helping them recognize that this is going to happen, especially if they're not in that perseveration state yet, which can take some time to kick in. If they're like, man, I really want to go back to that video game, and I haven't quite dialed in on that homework yet, it can be very painful. So recognize there's going to be some motivation consumption at that point. But work with them, recognize that their distractions aren't evil. We'll talk about that a little bit, but it's going to consume motivation. They also generate motivation much more quickly too. It kind of goes up fast, goes down fast. The distraction piece, also relevant for your kid. When we do get distracted, we do get pulled away. We can hyper-focus, and other times we bounce around. Distractions serve a purpose. They're there for survival. But with ADHD, they're told so often. There's some numbers that we've seen, like 17 times to 1, we get negative to positive feedback in schools. A lot of it's due to distractions with ADHD. And so there's a stigma for people with ADHD that, man, when I get distracted, it's bad. But that's not what we want to reinforce with them. It can cause problems, but distractions in themselves are meant to do something. Remember, they're urges, they come from the backside of our brain. It's sensory information, and it's trying to help you. We want to reinforce this with our kids and help them recognize, okay, your brain is trying to do something. It's not always helping. It's trying to help. Which distractions do we give into? Which ones do we simply go, oh, my phone went off. It's not my special ringtone that tells me there's an emergency. Therefore, I can ignore it for 30 minutes. Totally fine. Reconnect with the task at hand. Teaching them some of these skills, immensely helpful. So, reframe these distractions. Help them recognize that the redirection, reconnection, is going to be more than enough rather than the avoidance of a distraction. The distractions will happen. It already happens to all of us, but just more often with ADHD. This is actually very helpful for adults. I wouldn't do this as much for people under the age of 8, which I think some of you said, yeah, kids younger than 8. But you can use this if they get older and they're a little bit better at managing emotions, or at least being aware of emotions. Once they're about 8 or older, and there's a little bit more of that emotional awareness, they can do this pretty well. The main thing here is we want people with ADHD to get better at identifying the things that distract them from the task and deliberately ignore that distraction and come back to the task, and then at certain points of time, intentionally allow themselves to be distracted. You go through phases of I will not be distracted and phases of I will allow myself to be distracted or allow myself to be distracted. Here's how it works. Get a paper, pen, start a stopwatch. Not a timer that counts down, something that counts up. The first time you get distracted, you write it down. Like, man, I want to go check out the new Taylor Swift album. And then you write down the time. Oh, it's been 15 seconds. I just started and I'm already kind of distracted. Write down Taylor Swift album, 15 seconds. Get back to writing the paper. Then you're like, oh, I actually really want to go check out the album. You write it down again and you go, it's been 20 seconds. Cool. And you get back to the paper. And then you're like, okay, I'm actually kind of hungry. And you look at the timer, it's like 60 seconds now. You write down 60 seconds and write down hunger. At that point, number 3 urges, you can go take care of any need that you want. Use the restroom, go check out the album, whatever you want. Then, come back and start over. Start at 0, start the timer again, track 3 urges. Naturally, the cool thing is you don't have to do anything differently by doing this. I actually love doing this class. So if they have a therapy journal, you'll see that the times naturally get longer. You don't have to actually try to do anything differently. You'll see the times get longer and longer. The next one, instead of 15 seconds, it's like 20, then 60, then like 180. And the urges could be all over the place. You don't have to do anything about the urges, just make sure you reconnect. But I love this one. I say repeat the process 3 times. That number is a little bit more arbitrary. I'd make that so that it feels like they don't have to do it all day long. I like them to go through the cycle at least twice typically, but as long as they are willing. And I like to usually do it for at least like every day for a week, but anytime you feel like you're starting to get distracted and lose focus, where your kid is, you can re-implement this. So this is an intervention you can implement into your life and take out. Very helpful. Pomodoro technique. Who's heard of this before? Not many of you, but I bet you're familiar with it, but not called the Pomodoro technique. In essence, it's a special way to say I work and take a break. There are specific timings for it, typically. But with ADHD, we are going to adjust those timings slightly. We want shorter spurts of work and shorter spurts of breaks, and we want to handle breaks differently. So work for less time, sometimes 5 minutes, depending on what it is for kids, but I shoot for like 10 to 15, okay? So let's say 10 minutes of work for now. You can do like 3 to 5 minutes of a break, but I like to shoot for really short breaks, like 2 to 3, okay? I listed 3 for now. When you take a break, make the break as low dopamine related as possible. Don't call a friend. Don't hop on YouTube. Maybe you can grab some food, maybe you can go for a walk. Meditation's great. It's very hard for kids to take a break and not make it fun, but they can get up and do something else, but they can come back and repeat. Then they can take a long break. I did list they can take a long break for 15 minutes, but they can actually take a break for up to like 45 minutes and still do okay. But they can take a long break after. And during that long break, they can do whatever they want. What this does is during those periods of time where they take breaks and reconnect, they're not often seeking stimulation as often. They're working and they're not seeking stimulation. Working, not seeking stimulation. We want to teach their brain that that's not happening. So their brain can get into perseveration state much more easily. Okay? That's why I'm more content when they take the long break, they can do whatever they want. These are the 2 biggest pieces, or at least I imagine will be the biggest pieces of resistance for a lot of you. How the heck do we get them started? And how do we keep them on track? That's tough. It is really tough. And this is a lot of where my counseling sessions come into play, is a lot of anguish is here, a lot of frustration is here, and a lot of effort's put here as well. But if we can get to this point where we're kind of past these initial stages, we're getting to a point now where they're starting to see some effect. I am content with one of these 2 outcomes. When we're talking about independence, I'm not necessarily saying they have to do things, the kids have to do things just as good with no support. If they write a paper with you in 2 hours and get a B, I'm okay with them taking 2 hours and getting lower grades, but they do it about the same speed. Like, hey, I did a pretty good job. Or they get a B, but they take longer. Okay? Same level of quality, lower efficiency. Maybe higher efficiency, that's fine. Lower quality, that's okay. They're remembering the steps, not doing them as well. They're doing it well, but not quite getting all the steps. That's fine. When you're helping your kid work towards independence, you can pick one of those, and that's totally fine. You can help them try and do better without you, or do more without you, or do it as quickly without you, or feel less distressed without you. Pick some level of independence, and that's more than enough. The next stage of independence doesn't have to be complete independence, and praise them for it. Temporal discounting. Man, one of my favorite stories is about when I worked with this accountant. His kid's name was Mikey. The accountant's name is Jake. Mikey came in, and Mikey's like, Dad, can you read me a story? And Jake is like, yeah, sure. I'll do it in 10 minutes. And he grabbed his phone, and I had it was like a kid's app, timer app. He's like, when the animals run away from the zoo or something, something cute. And he's like, when they run away from the zoo, I will read you the story. It's like in 10 minutes. And Mikey puts on a pouty face. And I'm like, oh, he's in trouble. Because I thought. And he's like, I don't want to read it in 10 minutes. I want to read it today. And I was dying. We were both dying. And we're like, how do we teach this kid that 10 minutes is today? And it was going to take some time to figure that out. And his dad had to explain to him, no, I'll do it today. It will. And they were just butting heads. Temporal discounting is this element of if something's going to happen further out, we don't feel the impact of it. If something's going to be next week, it might as well be next year. This kid was never going to get the story read to him, he thought. We already do this naturally as humans. With ADHD, boy, it is rough. I talked to some of you before starting this workshop, and some of you already described the feeling of kids doing things last second. Until it's right up against the deadline, boy, we don't feel that stress. I say we, because I'm also in that boat. It happens. With ADHD, it's especially true. We want to take this into account. And a lot of the times, this can work. Some people make it through high school and do quite well. Some struggle through high school, but they get to college and they can really flounder. Other times they struggle their entire academic career. This can make it tough to identify that their time management skills are poor and we don't see it until they leave the home, or we don't see it until they hit high school, or we don't see it until they get a job. There are sometimes these things don't show up all the time. So to do this, to manage this, there are some specific focuses. And it does differ because the perception of time does change. Oh yeah, this kid was 5, by the way. Not like a 16-year-old kid. But when they're young, there are different interventions we like to use, okay? So I walked this guy a little bit through some skills. And when they're older, it is a totally different set of skills. There are parts of our brain that do develop differently at different times, and the time management piece and the emotions related to it do shift. So, for under the age of 8, this is what I like to do. And I love this exercise. It's very fun. I like to ask kids, whatever emotion they're feeling, especially if it causes a big reaction, how long they think they'll feel it for. Sometimes it's I'm angry, I'm going to feel it for a year. I'm like, cool. I'm going to ask you in a little bit and see if you still feel that. And as I check in 30 minutes, I'm like, are you still angry? They're like, yeah. How long will you feel it for? And they get a little bit better at identifying what that looks like, maybe by the end of the day. Get a little bit better. And I ask in the next session or the next meeting. And over time, these kids can get really good at taking something like, I feel bad, I feel guilty. How long do you feel this way? Until I get home from school, but then I'll talk to mom and everything will be okay. And I'm like, this kid can see a pattern of what happens with this emotion. They'll feel bad, they can see what that's going to look like. They'll make it through this period. They know how to manage it, and they know that emotion will go down. When a kid gets really good at that, their ability to take an emotional experience in the future and identify what that means for them now improves a ton. That's what I'm looking for. And to be frank, there are adults that can struggle with this too. So while I like to work with this with kids, there are adults I'll work with and I'll go, hey, you have this experience? How long will you be anxious for? All night. So sometimes I'll adjust it and I'll say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how intense is it and how long will it stay at that intensity? So sometimes I like to work on that scale because we can feel anxious for a long time, but it's hard to feel it at that level for 90 minutes. Usually the most is 180 minutes. So that is what I like to do. It's a very fun one to do. Okay, for older students, there's a lot of specific executive functioning skills where despite what we feel, we actually bring a lot of cognition into it. I talked a lot about emotion today already, but actually, we're going to focus on, what do we do mentally? We offshore a lot of mental processes, and I will talk about these examples specifically because the taskless one is huge. A lot of students, I know we're talking about homework, a lot of students have Canvas or Blackboard, Google Classroom, where homework is all kind of set up on a to-do list. still utilize a task list that compiles everything. This would mean getting a habit of bringing everything from school, from work, from mom and dad, from my friends, and just putting it all in one spot. It's a very good lifelong habit. There's a lot of research that backs it. But getting to the point where you can identify, here's what I have going on a timetable, is going to go a long way for you being able to identify what's the emotional impact it has on me now. I can see everything that's coming up. What do I need to do about it? Sometimes people will see that and they feel the emotion and they flee. That at least gives me information still of, hey, you identify it. We're not totally avoiding up front. We can do the planning and then we flee. Why? I'm stressed and anxious. I feel like I'm inadequate. I'm incompetent. I can't do this. At least it lets me address what are the things that we feel like we're falling short in. It's a very good intervention for at least addressing what's getting in the way. It requires really troubleshooting and sticking to it, though. Then, when it comes to things like, well, I have all these things I want to do. People with ADHD love to make lists, and we love to overplan everything. If we have ever written a paper, like a 20-page paper in 2 hours, we plan every 20-page paper as though we can do it in 2 hours. And we do this with all of our tasks. And so our task lists become very ambitious all the time. So I like to have people, well, I didn't list this one. I like to have people take their task list, cut it in half, and cut it in half again. And it's painful. Like, just make your task list for the day. And cutting it in half once is painfully agonizing. Doing it a second time is like near murder. They go from like 20 tasks to 5, and they feel like that's not good enough to be a good person. But with the 20, they're not even doing 1. Going to the 5 makes a big difference in helping them prioritize what really needs to happen, what really needs to be done, and how does this define me? And then sometimes, that's where this one comes in, if that's still very difficult and we're processing the emotions around it, I say, what doesn't have to get done? And we put that on a list that we don't even touch. And it could be, we don't touch it today, we don't touch it this week. You're not even allowed to work on this until next week. Why hold him accountable to this? He's not allowed to do this. No more car parts. So, for older students, a lot of it is task management and the emotions that play a role in that. But you do have to bring it into the present regularly. Free time. I do want to go over one other tactic, and this one other one, and this is more for adults. This could be relevant for you, but especially for college kids. There's a calendaring technique that a lot of research is starting to push for, which is cool, but we don't put task lists on our calendar. Instead, tasks go on tasks, but on the calendar, we leave these events or these blocks of time blank if there's nothing that goes there. If there's no event, it's blank. At first, this is actually really rough for people with ADHD because it's free time. I can game, I can have fun, I can sleep, I can do whatever I want. Instead, we start doing something else. If you have an hour there, instead of just doing what you feel like in the moment, which is our reactive response, we just want to do whatever feels good, we instead say, all right, I have a certain amount of time here, I have an hour. And with that hour, what is everything that's on my mind that might not be on my task list that's come up today? From there, I review the things I've come up that are on my mind, plus the task list that I already have. I compare them. Then, this one is not what the research shows, but I find this to be helpful in my practice. So I did list it. But doing something meditative, where you're not immediately jumping into problem solving, but you just sit, be bored, be present. And the reason why I like to do it in my practice is you just assess your needs. And it's hard to do that if you're immediately jumping into some cognitive exercise. Being content with feeling sleepy, bored, anxious, angry. I feel like it's helpful for my clients to feel that way. Don't have to, but I listed that here. And then what you do is actually based on the most pressing need, which can be that cognitive piece. There's a task here. I have an errand I need to run. Or I have something coming up soon. If I don't start now, I'm going to miss it. It's a 3-day paper I have to work on. Or, man, I have been rude to my mom lately. I need to repair this relationship. It's been nagging at me. I've been go, 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 so I haven't felt anything about it lately. So focusing on needs. And so suddenly each moment of free time isn't really free time. It's time to actually take care of what you need. And sometimes it is self-care, and sometimes it is tasking. But we teach them this. It's a very tough process as well. But I usually reserve it for people like 21 and older. That's about where I use it. You can certainly use it for younger, but that's about the audience I use it with. It's very easy to feel that shame because there is a lot of comparison that goes on. They're in these schools, they get compared a lot already. I talk very frankly about it. There is a discrepancy. It's not a superpower. It's talked about as though it's a superpower, but it's not. There's a lot of research that points to what ADHD looks like neurologically compared to non-ADHD brains, and there aren't really a lot of advantages. But there's a lot of things like that aren't advantages, a lot of mental health disorders. And so we treat it the same way. Hey, here are your deficiencies. You get distracted easily, get excited easily, get discouraged easily, you have a lot of trouble sleeping a lot of the time, or waking up grumpy. These are the things you struggle with. Much like how other people struggle with anxiety, depression, trauma. People have their own demons to fight, and here's yours. And when you're a kid, the gap actually is big, right, at first. And as you get older, the gap actually gets pretty small. They won't know that yet. You don't have to talk to them about that yet, but keep that in mind. The gap is bigger, younger, and it naturally gets smaller when they're older. By about like 18 to 21, it gets pretty less significant. So if you can keep that in mind and help them recognize, you can just help them bridge that gap, help them be patient, help accept them, help them recognize, yeah, it's there, it's a problem. And it's a problem in terms of executive functioning, but not a problem in terms of worth or value, and you're not bothered by it. Okay, now you're distracted, we'll work on it. If you want to work on it, I'll work on it too. Or hey, it takes a little more effort for you to do this, I'll put more effort in as well. Totally fine, and we can talk about some of those techniques. Work on that with them. You can reduce that shame there, but recognize if you beat around the bush or try and put a positive spin on it, I think it often can do more damage. Okay, typically. Then when the time comes that they do get a little older, usually it's only about like age 11, doesn't take much longer. Around like age 11, they start to see what you're seeing. Okay, age 8 is when they start to develop those empathy skills, the part of their brain where they go, oh, it's called egocentrism. Everything revolves around them as a kid, up until about 8. And then they start to see things from others' point of view, and around 11, they get a little bit better at foresight. They'll start to see more of what you're talking about. Like, oh, I can actually have a happy life despite being distractible and despite struggling with motivation. And if you keep that dialogue up, it's totally fine. Oh, totally fine. Some people struggle with addressing that directly. Don't feel like you have to put a positive spin on it. You're distractible, but also you're very good at this. It's more like, hey, you get distracted easily, and that's okay. That's all you have to do. Okay, good. I can go more into that if you'd like later, but I think this is very relevant for a lot of people. And those of you that have kids that don't have ADHD, it's the same thing. Okay? You have anxiety, that's okay. Not you have anxiety, but that means you care. So you have anxiety, that's okay. You're depressed, that's okay. We'll work through it. I'm going to put effort in. I hope you put effort in too. All of it's okay.
Why does ADHD make you overplan everything?
Sometimes we act without planning, right? We jump in. But there's an element of reward that comes from planning. People with ADHD love to put things together, like to build things out, but the act can be very distressing sometimes. Let's say it's homework. Building out a paper or a layout for an assignment is much more rewarding than the actual act of writing and agonizing over the boring parts of a paper. But there is a foot in the door technique I like to use, where I tell people, hey, set up your assignment, don't do the assignment. They're like, but I have to do the assignment. No, just set it up. The next day, set up the next page. The next day, do this. All this planning is very rewarding. There are these checkpoints, basically. They get these dopamine hits. It feels good. It's something we can capitalize on, totally fine, but it's very good, and they are good at it a lot of the time. There is an element, I will mention this. As much as ADHD is not a superpower, a lot of what happens is they put themselves, me as well, in situations where we have to practice certain skills way more often. I procrastinated way more often than many of my peers. But that means I had to put myself in a situation where I had to write papers last second way more often than my peers. We are not naturally good at writing papers, but I can probably write a paper twice as fast compared to my peers now, not because of how my brain works, but because I've had to practice way more. This can happen with certain aspects of planning. Certain people with ADHD, if you ask them to write a paper, they probably couldn't do it very well, but you put them in like a last second situation and they can plan the heck out of it. And they can write the heck out of it too. It's very rewarding, and they can do it very well. I had a client that wrote a paper while he was driving on the way to UVU. That was his I know, I was terrified. I'm like, I hope that's not a normal occurrence, but he was like driving, typing, printed it as he was walking up to the school and turned it in class 2 minutes late. It's a normal occurrence for some people. Okay, new norms. Yeah, there are people on the road. Be careful. Okay, so norms. One of my favorite studies, because I like to think about it, not because of how the study was operated necessarily, was about these 5 monkeys, initially, that were in this room. There's a big pole and a beautiful bouquet of fruit at the top. And the researchers were like, all right, monkeys, go to town, have the fruit. And the monkeys were like, heck yeah, let's go. And they started climbing up. And the researchers shot the monkeys off the pole with water cannons. It's like super mean. I was like, what the heck? But I like the idea that comes after, where they then took a monkey, threw him out of the room, and then brought another monkey in and just said, all right, monkey, go for it. The monkey's like, sweet, why not? And as it went up the pole, the other monkeys were like, what are you doing? And grabbed the monkey and pulled it back down, over and over. Until the monkey's like, well, I guess I'm not supposed to do that. And they took one of the original monkeys out, brought a new one in, repeated the process, and even that first new monkey that came in pulled that new monkey down. Until all of the new monkeys in the room had never felt a water cannon, but you all knew you're supposed to pull monkeys down. Just staring at the beautiful fruit. So sad. And so what I love about, in terms of thinking about it, is that norms are there to protect us, even if we don't know why. I teach a counseling class at UVU. And in that class, I do a unit on norms. And I love starting class up, because usually people get really into it. We are pretty good friends by the end. The peers do a lot of role play and talking, and it's a very boisterous class. But if I go in early and I start whispering. And I whisper to a couple students at first. Until class starts, everyone's whispering. They don't know why. They don't know if they should be, but they whisper. No one even asks why. There are a lot of norms that we just look and assess and we go, here's what I'm supposed to do. If I do otherwise, I'm dead. At least that's what our brain tells us. Our brain really likes norms. We want to capitalize on this. ADHD, a lot of the time, these kids are fighting against norms, and that's why they get punished a lot. Hey, don't get distracted. That's bad. Luckily, ADHD is becoming more of a norm now. It's becoming more accepted. Still punishing in a lot of ways, but in your homes, we want to set some type of norm around how we handle ADHD and how we handle new interventions. I want to capitalize on that. For all of you, some things to keep in mind. Norms specifically. Even if you implement something that's not as effective, or even related to ADHD, implement something. The fact that when you implement something and you're consistent with it, you become more trustworthy. Not because people can confide in you, not because you're soft-spoken or gentle when people tell you deep, dark secrets, but it's because of predictability. Our brains love predictability. There are some therapists that really capitalize on this. Like they use the same greeting every single time. I don't think that deeply about it, but they're like, man, I have to like shake the hand, look them in the eyes and say, how's Thursday shaking up for you today? And they do the same thing. I don't think I have to do that. And others go the opposite route where they like shift things around in the room and they're dealing with like trauma patients. Play therapy is a big one where this is actually often recommended, where you put this red card in the same spot. Kids put things around different places and they rearrange it. There's like a map. And you say you have to put the toys in the same spot for the kids. So you can use norms for and against different reasons, and I think all of it's fine. For you though, become predictable. When you do something new and it breaks an old norm, we want that to be expected. Oh, mom and dad are doing a new thing, and I expect them to keep doing it. Oh, here's another new thing mom and dad are doing, and I expect them to keep doing it. As opposed to, mom and dad are doing a new thing. What's going on? What's going to happen? Or they'll just keep it up for a week or so. They will not stick to their guns. Make norm setting a norm. Stick to it. We'll figure out how to tap into this. Okay? I said 2 weeks is like really typical for where people drop off. It is all the time. The next milestone's about 6 weeks. So I usually tell people go for like 6 weeks. Whenever you start anything new, go for about 6 weeks. If you are going to do an intervention, pick something you can do for a long period of time. A lot of habits are built in like 66 repetitions for a neurotypical brain. That's where we have neurons that start to line up, and it's called myelination. We get like a fatty tissue, it speeds up some of the circuitry and it insulates it so it's stronger. For ADHD, it's 250 repetitions. It's way longer, unless there's dopamine involved, and it's like the second time I play the game, I'm obsessed. So if you're implementing a new norm, go for longer. I say 6 weeks, but try and stick with it, and it doesn't really matter what it is. So let's do one that's unrelated to a child, or you work on a child. If you're starting like a yoga class, let the kids see that you're doing a yoga class. You have like a new outfit, you go every day, like right when they get home from school, let them see that something's happening, and you do that every day or every week. Or you start gardening, but they don't have to be involved with it. Make that happen. My brother, it kills me, he does something called pea party, where they grab peas from the garden and they sit on the trampoline and eat the peas. And it kills me because the kids just think it's funny. And it became a norm where they're like, every Sunday we sit on the trampoline and eat peas. And they just think it's a funny name. And so they do that every week. Nothing really special about it other than that the kids are expecting it. So you can do something that's that they see you implement. It doesn't have to even affect the kid. But when you're implementing a norm, again, the kid sees it, they anticipate it. Good. If it does affect the kid, great. Get them involved in like a social contract. You can do a token economy. Hey, you get points if you do chores. Stick with it. Sticker charts are great too. Whatever you implement, you can include the kid also. Okay, good. I'm glad you mentioned that. So the norms are like things I actually implement. Other things that are less common, I do this with like couples counseling. So I might have them schedule arguments. And so they'll sit down. I'm like, all right, how about we start arguing now just to see how it goes? They're like, okay, I'll try. And one's like, how dare you? And the other person's like, that didn't activate me at all. Like, that's not how you start an argument. It's like, well, how do I start an argument? They have to like figure it out. And so I have them do this every day. So like 5 minutes a day, they try and argue, and at some point it clicks. It doesn't start with someone yelling. I start with someone saying, hey, did you do the dishes? And suddenly an emotion like springs up, like, oh no, I didn't. Do you want me to do it now? Like, no, you don't have to. And then like certain like interactions occur where we're like, oh, I can feel something kind of like boiling up. Those are norms, where we can see patterns play out, and we identify like the messy things, but there's actually things that precurse it. We want the kids to be able to see the same patterns. Hey, mom's going to do this thing, and I can see the whole thing playing out. Okay, great question. Okay, global rules. Oh, this comes up a lot. What if one kid struggles with homework? and the other one doesn't. I want to make a rule for one kid, but not make them feel singled out. Curfew comes up a lot. One kid is always late, but the other one's very respectful. I don't want to make it so one kid has to come home early, but the other ones don't. Find ways to make rules global. A really easy way I like to make it work, is almost like a punishment or strike system. So it's like, hey, everyone's home by 10, but if you come home by 10 3 times in a row, you can be out till 12. And like, hey, if the kid's actually home on time, then maybe they can be out later. But if you're targeting a kid and want them home by 10 all the time, then you are setting like a different standard. But hey, if they're home by 10 every single time, are they actually okay staying out to 10:30, then 11? Maybe it's an age element. Hey, 13-year-olds home by 10, 15-year-olds home by 11. There are ways you can get creative with it. We can make it so that a kid does not feel singled out, but make it clear so that kid knows how to get around that. And the other kids don't feel like you're shooting the flock so everyone's punished. This can help with norms too and make you more predictable. This is hard, the part that we will talk about. There's an element here where you can try all of the interventions in the world and you will cause ruptures. This actually happens therapeutically as well. Some approaches therapeutically happens intentionally, where you have a group therapy and you sit there and 2 people are bickering and you just let it happen. You're like, all right, let's talk about it. But with you and your kid, there's going to be pushback and resistance. When you implement something new, a new norm, you haven't changed anything in how you operate in your family for a long time, and now you're implementing something different. And there's pushback. How do we build rapport? You've heard about probably a bazillion ways at this point. I don't know if it's podcasts or books or friends or whatever it may be, but there are so many ways to build rapport. I'm going to talk about it more from ADHD's perspective specifically and a little bit from more the clinical side. But in the end, be present and attune. Presentness is hard because a lot of the time we're trying to get to an outcome with them. Weird thing is, a lot of people with ADHD or kids, they're also looking for an outcome. I want my mom and dad to do this, or I also need to get this done today. Mom and dad, will you help? You don't have to get there with them. Don't jump to problem solving either. Getting to a point where you're content with their process or just content with what they're feeling or where they're at is great. Attuning is a little bit different. You're there, like being present, but you're matching a little bit of what you're feeling with them. You're setting aside your agenda, and you're setting aside what you want. Okay? You're not disregarding you. Being present means you're taking into account you and them. Attuning is, okay, I'm here for you. I am now empathizing. Okay? They're a little different. When we build rapport with people with ADHD, these are going to be really helpful skills that are really overlooked, and sometimes overlooked because the kid with ADHD is pushing this route. They want you to push for a solution. They want to get out of a conversation. We're going to talk about boundaries as well. Boundaries come up in a lot of different contexts. But this is going to be one of the main things I hope you walk away with today. Even if you don't use the skill associated with it, hope you remember the concept associated with it. I think it's one of the more important ones. With boundaries, I would rather you think of them using another word, and that would be priorities. Many people think of boundaries as, here's a rule, I don't want you to cross it. As therapists, what comes up a lot is like, hey, I don't want my clients calling me after midnight. But if they get in a car accident, then maybe they should call me. They can break that boundary for this one. Actually, though, if they haven't called 911 first, then maybe they should do that, then they should call me. And it's a series of like breaking rules for other rules. There's a lot of boundary holding advice out there that I think is pretty rough if you listen to it. It's not the greatest. It's a term that's thrown out there a lot. There's a lot that actually is good out there. With ADHD, I like this approach. Instead of breaking one rule for another, it's I have this boundary, I have this priority. I don't want to be called after midnight, but I'm willing to sacrifice it if you have no one else to call and you need some help. But I don't want to sacrifice that unless or I'm willing to sacrifice that if you've already called the police. Or you keep going up the list. Hey, sibling, I don't want you to gossip about family members unless you're in distress. I don't want you to do that unless they said you can tell or you have permission to talk about the issue with mom and dad. But if they haven't given you permission, you can share it if you're suicidal or whatever it may be. You might have your own list of priorities. And you as a couple or other caregivers might find that your priorities differ, and that's okay. You don't have to align with your spouse either. And your kid can know that. You can align in terms of your priorities, not your priorities, your like protocols in the family, what your rules are and how you operate, but your priorities between you and your spouse, they can actually differ. That's okay. I care more that you get school done. Mom cares more that you break up with your girlfriend. Totally fine. You all have different priorities. We'll go over how to manage that. There's an exercise I want to try, we'll talk about. But let's talk about some ways to build a relationship. Excitement. I use this word very intentionally. There are lots of ways that we can bring joy and happiness, but with ADHD, when we're looking at building a relationship, excitement sticks in our brain. It can happen even beforehand. If you get excited about something, you already released dopamine before the thing has even happened. And so if you can get a kid excited, you can get your spouse excited, you get excited, you already are forming a type of bonding without even having done the activity. So if you have Disneyland coming up in 2 weeks, instead of just planning it and making it a surprise, which is actually kind of fun too, you can be like, hey, 5 days of Disneyland. You're like, yay, let's do it. Every day you make that comment, the kid bonds with you. It's kind of interesting psychology with ADHD. So you can kind of ritualize anything that causes some level of excitement. Capitalize on it. You can do this with video games as well. You can do this with them talking about their boyfriend, girlfriend, their sports. I usually ask kids to tell me about like their battle royale or whatever it is in Fortnite that they get, and they like telling me about it. It's exciting. Expertise. I actually like doing this even for adults. Asking people for their help on something, I actually get genuine help a lot of the time. Like, hey, my car broke down. Mr. Client, what would you do? And they're like, oh, just go do this. They get really pumped about it. People have really good advice, and people are really good at things I'm terrible at. But it also builds rapport, which is great. With kids, like the kid I got help with Sudoku from. At the treatment center, I picked something he was good at. I found out what it is that kind of looks like school. I picked a puzzle. Find something. Find something your kid's good at. Ask them for help on. This one, emotion. This one's interesting because a lot of parents feel like they have to get the right emotion when they ask. And to build rapport appropriately, you see a kid that storms into the car, shuts the door, and throws their backpack and goes, I'm fine. Things are fine. And you have to say, hey, you seem angry. You could even just say, hey, you seem sad. It's like, not quite right. Like, no, I'm not sad. That actually builds rapport. It seems like they get more angry, but by asking about an emotion directly, you build connection. There's actually some therapeutic techniques that do that. I do that. I intentionally pick an emotion incorrectly that's close, where they say they're anxious. And I say something like, man, that must be really like confusing, which is not an emotion. And they're like, no, it's not confusing. It's like, it's frustrating. I'm like, that's a better word. I like that. Picking something, doesn't really matter what the emotion is. Telling them, hey, it seems like you feel like this. You can totally botch it, but name it. Call it out. It can give you some insight to how they're feeling. Shows that you're listening. That's more than enough. Take the risk. Don't feel like you have to beat around the bush. Say it directly. Build rapport. This is one that actually, an exercise I love to do in workshops. I'll probably do it at the very end with all of you that are willing to stay after it, because it takes some practice. Sometimes it takes upwards of like 30 minutes even. It's very hard. Hard meaning it takes a little bit of effort to go from, I see the main goal, but when I try and do it, I struggle with it. I stumble upon it. I stumble upon myself, my words. It's tough. But I love when parents can do this, especially when I see years later their kid is able to use this. Here's what happens. When we hold boundaries well, in the method that I had described, we are really teaching our kids, here are my priorities, and if we want the kid to work with us and work within our boundaries, they have to be able to meet our priorities. A good example that came up a few months ago at another workshop is a parent had talked about, I want to get my kid out of bed in the morning, but I don't want them to like yell at me. How do I do that? Which one's a higher priority? What should I do? This comes up a lot. I want to address my kid with his marijuana use, but I also don't want him to feel like he has to run away from the family and hide. And so there are these elements of like, I have priorities, and we have this conflict of, I want to do this, but yet this. That's where this comes into play. If you are certain what action you want to take, you don't use this exercise. But if you want to do something, but you're not sure about the backlash, or if you want to take a certain action, but you're worried about the effects of it in terms of, could I have done a different thing? That's where this one comes into play. Here's how it works. First, you have the two choices. Can I get an example? Who has an idea of a choice they're thinking about right now? I see a couple smiles. Right now that they're like, I don't know what I'm torn between. I recognize that what you're saying is the cute part is grabbing the bag, not the running away part. Yeah, okay, I got you. Okay, so what you're saying is, it's the overwhelm that you want to address. Do I address the overwhelm, or if I press, does the kid want to run away? I don't want that either. Those are your two priorities. I don't want them to run away. I don't want them to feel overwhelmed. That's a great example. And so you have these two options. Good. Then we pick one. There's a reason why we do this up front. Because you'll often get in a situation where you try and pick one in the moment and negotiate, and the kid will push back. Have one ready to go for, which means you've already picked which one's the higher priority. I recognize that in a lot of situations, there's more than two priorities. But for this, for argument's sake and for this exercise, stick with two. Then we talk about the value or priority behind each. When we talk about overwhelm, addressing the overwhelm, what do you really care about?
Ultimately, Kathy's going to be in the future.
Okay.
I know that's one of the things that I don't want to
Okay, good. And the other one is avoiding the runaway. What do we care about there? What's the priority?
safety.
Oh, and everyone else is like, I see it, safety. Good. Then we use this exercise. There's actually another step, which we'll talk about after for those that want to say, but we actually focus even more on our needs. So you say, I want him to be okay. There's actually something about you that you care about. It's like, let's take the parent that didn't want the kid to like be on me in the morning. It's like, well, I don't want the kid yelling at me, but I also don't want to feel like a bad mom. We end up turning it into what it is about us. I want this for me and I want this for me. So you want them to be safe and you don't want them to struggle. But there's something that you get out of it, which we won't address now, but recognize that when you do this exercise, you do eventually make it about you. I didn't list that as a step yet, but as an advanced part. When you talk to them, you use this phrase. I do like using the exact phrase. Usually when I do this exercise, people try and put their own spin on it, and they have to think really hard about what they're trying to say. But when you just say, on one hand, I want you to not feel overwhelmed. On the other hand, I want you to be safe. It's much easier to do, and the kid in the future is much better at being able to implement it themselves. And that's what I see. One of my clients' kids was able to go on a date later in college and able to use the same theme. She was like, oh, I saw my parents do this, and she tried to utilize it, and she kind of made it work because she saw her parents do it for a number of years. It was pretty cool. I do it with my wife. Like, where do you want to eat? She's like, on one hand, I want something that's like cheap. But on the other hand, I want like aubergines and healthy food. And healthy food's never cheap. And so we had to choose between like those two things. You can do it for all sorts of things. Those are priorities. If the kid pushes back, you already know what you want to do. Help the kid recognize that you're torn, and if they can meet your priorities, you can also help meet their priorities. Some more advanced techniques will come later, but this is the starting point. If you get really good at this, a lot of the other places you can go will come naturally. I could talk about the next steps here, but you could probably figure out the rest just fine. Just by making it clear, here are my priorities and here's how you can meet them. First 3 steps. Get their foot in the door, even if they do nothing else. They broke away from something, they started a task. Eventually, when they do start a task, if you can keep them going for longer than 30 seconds, also a win. Then you push for independence. Again, doesn't have to be complete independence. It can be independence with certain types of tasks, or some level of quality or efficiency, all that's fine. Last 2 sections, want to make sure that they can predict what you're doing, and want to make sure that you're able to work on a relationship building style more specific for ADHD. That's it. So for now, I'll answer some questions. And then after I answer some global questions, we'll kind of officially wrap up the workshop. And then I'll say after for anyone else that wants some more direct coaching. So we'll go from there. Any global questions? With transitions, getting that point where you can do this, the getting them started, is huge. So finding ways where they can go from, man, I don't want to do this thing, to I'm willing to just do something is helpful. And with teachers, if they're struggling with that, helping the teachers recognize that you can make something excitable. That deliberation piece as well of, man, I don't want to sit and think and dread and agonize over the transition, and making it short is very helpful. I think that's my phone. Thank you. Is making that short is great. So some people like to make very long step lists, but if you can make it really quick, that's huge. So if you can really simplify some of the prep work like the night before, awesome, but then just say, hey, backpack and shoes, go. They're gonna miss some things, but make that as burdenless as possible, and then eventually add more and more steps. That's huge. That's the concept of the get them started, get them okay, get them used to it, set some of those norms, and then eventually you can add more. Teachers won't have that luxury. If you can get to the point where you can reduce some distress though, where they can practice transitioning over and over, where they can go from, thank you, where they can go from one task to another, that's a helpful exercise as well, which means they can even go from like one video game to another. That's really helpful. So even if they're playing a game, hey, I want to play a game, let's do this, or can we do this in like 2 minutes? And they're in the middle of a round, they're gonna panic. And so finding ways to help them transition even from one fun thing to another still causes some of that perseveration struggle. So it doesn't have to be from like fun to boring or boring to boring. Fun to fun is still hard. So even doing that is a good exercise for transitions. So those are some good things you can practice, and even for teachers, that's a good thing to practice too, fun to fun. Okay, I'm glad you brought it up. It's easier to be broad just because you can apply it a little bit more when I don't have context, right? I'll give you an example about where you have to be a little bit broad. There's a lot of people out there making recommendations on accommodations. Accommodations are very helpful for ADHD, but there's a lot of recommendations out there that are not helpful. What happens is a lot of even clinicians that aren't ADHD specialized, they make recommendations like, I want the kid to get a distraction-free room to take tests in. Those of you that have ADHD, you probably know what that's like, to be in a completely barren room with one person watching you, and when you flip a paper, it's really loud. It's really distracting. But a distraction-reduced room is actually really good. Well, there's maybe like 4 kids in there, or maybe you can have like white noise, or maybe like some music. That's great. 30 kids, you actually still can do pretty well in, but having more time is still pretty good. Like a distraction-reduced room and some leniency on time is great. But many people make recommendations on like, you need to be in your own room with no distractions. This actually reduces test scores. So, getting the right accommodations is huge, which means you probably want a specialist that can actually offer those recommendations. And then with teachers, they'll hear all sorts of things from lots of different people. So long as you have someone on the IEP plan or 504 plan, the team, that can make that or give that recommendation, you're probably good to go at first. From there are other things you can do. For kids above a certain age, like medication is actually very helpful, more helpful than any other medication for another mental health disorder, which a lot of therapists won't want to tell you, wonder why. But despite therapists wanting to do therapy with your kid, medication is actually really helpful. I recommend it in a lot of situations, like go see a psychiatrist or doctor and see if it makes sense for your kid. The second biggest one I think is depression. Don't quote me on that. But there's also a lot of comorbidities too. So if they have ADHD, they're probably also likely to struggle with anxiety or communication struggles or sleep disorders. And so make sure you look at other things that might get in the way and make sure you can address those too. So those are what come to mind right away. You can talk to me after too and see if there's more, but that's what comes to mind. There are some people that sleep better with stimulants, where if you have racing thoughts at night, those soldiers like wake up and they can actually kind of shut down those racing thoughts, but your body does activate either way, and it is a stimulant. So there are a lot of other things to think about too. So even though I like to work with ADHD clients and spend a lot of time with them, typically just me alone is not adequate. Working with like a team of people is what needs to happen with ADHD, typically. There's two different kinds of resistance that I like to go over. There's intentional resistance. That's what you're encountering. I don't want help. He probably doesn't know how to do some of it, but can't really implement or use it well. Or maybe doesn't want your help or help from authority. There's something there, right? But he's resisting. There's unintentional resistance, which is a lot of what we talked about today. You're fighting against neurological factors or social factors or something. And usually you're up against both. When working with them, we have to identify what the resistance is. We know there's going to be the unintentional side. When I'm working with unintentional resistance, I'm thinking there might be some emotional piece. You go to do a task, you feel distress, you run away, we soothe, we're done with that homework or video game, distress comes back. Like that's the unintentional piece. But if there's that intentional piece, is it just you? Is it everybody? What's going on? If we can find out what the cause of that is, like, man, you go talk to him, or a friend talks to him, or if he reacts this way to everybody, there's an element of shame reduction that might have to happen. This often means talking about homework and showing less care about output and failure, and showing more curiosity. And usually we do that by also showing gratitude. Like, hey, thanks for telling me. He'll often start by trying to withhold information, like how's school? He's like, good. And instead of like prying more, like, hey, thanks for telling me. And if that's not what you normally do and that's a new norm, it goes a long way. That intentional resistance of pushing back starts to go down because the emotional reactivity starts to go down. If that's what we're starting to see, and we start to see that intentional piece get removed, and hopefully with you, he will feel a little bit better about hearing about school or talking about school. If there's a discrepancy between you and someone else, like a sibling or a friend, then we do look at norms and patterns with you. Like if you're the one that had to manage homework, and it's interesting because sometimes you're the only reason he passed school. Like you had to do this for him to pass a class. But if it's a huge source of stress, and he associates that with stress, that's where some of the unintentional side can come in. You mentioned school, stress spikes. Like how do we talk about school and not spike stress? We talk about school and then don't do anything else. School good? Cool. Leave it at that. School good? Cool. Leave it at that. This does mean you often take short-term failures. That's a painful part I work on with a lot of families, is if we want to get to that point, families have to be content with the kid failing at some point with not getting assignments in or completing work if we're going to be okay with them not confiding with us on everything. So Work on the communication piece, showing gratitude with what he does share with you, and being content when he doesn't share everything with you. That's if that's the priority. If you need him to do well for whatever reason, and also you're struggling with that piece, you can bring in a third party. Third parties can help. So a peer tutor or a counselor or a teacher, that can also work. Okay, that's the resistance piece, and also like an alternative solution. This starts to fall a little bit outside the ADHD element, I would say. The parts where that overlaps, I'll also answer this probably after the workshop, but the part where this does overlap is with ADHD, we are so heavily rewarded by social factors, okay? By the time we're about age 11 to 14, our priorities in terms of who we listen to shifts. Seeing parents as a figurehead, the people that we listen to in our lives, changes and it shifts more towards friends. And that kind of solidifies by age 14. As much as we want our kids to be our friends, we have a different role. And so by that point, a lot of what we do is we actually redefine our relationship with our kids. And in that situation, one other element is we often see our kids as 3 years behind where they already are at too. And so let's say they're 14, we're kind of treating them like they're age 11, but they've already been at the point where they're highly prioritizing friendship. And with ADHD, that's amplified. For you, there's an element where showing more curiosity and approaching things more friendly, but less of a parent. You are in a parent role. You are in a parent role, right? People are like, am I a friend or am I a parent? That's the role you'll take. But yet, we approach things in a different social dynamic. You do show curiosity. We do build rapport in that way. And we show, let's take this element of pushing back. Instead of attacking it, you can seriously ask directly, why do you do this? And I've done that with kids and parents in the room. I'm like, hey, mom does this, and every time she does this, you go, no, mom, that's wrong. I didn't have to turn it in that day. No, that wasn't late. And I'm like, hey, mom is wrong. And you had to jump in right then and there and to correct her. Why couldn't you wait 5 seconds for mom to finish? He's like, well, because it doesn't really matter. But I ask, and I get an idea of how much of that is impulse, how much of that is ADHD, how much of that is anger. Mom's trying to screw me over, misrepresent me. Show curiosity and ask about the defiance. Totally fine, but not out of retaliation or anger yourself. If you're not in that position yourself, wait. But if you can approach it from a calm perspective and just show that curiosity, you really want to know why they react that way, it goes a long way in helping diffuse the situation. We'll end here for now, but I'll still stick around for 15 minutes to answer other questions more directly and talk about your specific circumstance, but we'll go from there for today. Okay, thank you for joining. Good questions.